Alfred Granger had 3 rules about women on his ranch, and every last man on his payroll knew them by heart the way they knew the Lord's Prayer, not because they believed in them, but because breaking them meant consequences swift and final as a bullet through dry timber. The first rule was simple enough. No woman set foot inside the stable without his express permission. The horses were his pride, his livelihood, the beating heart of everything he had built since he was 19 years old with dirt under his fingernails, and nothing but a $40 saddle and a borrowed mare to his name. The stable was sacred ground. The second rule was equally clear. No woman touched the ranch books. The ledgers, the tallies, the contracts with the cattle buyers out of Abilene, those were his alone. He had been swindled once, 7 years back, by a sweet-faced woman in Dodge City who had smiled at him over a dinner table while her brother cleaned out his bank account using forged figures Alfred himself had naively left exposed. He had learned. He had built a wall of numbers around himself as solid as the stone foundation beneath his ranch house, and no woman was going past it. The third rule was the one that made his ranch hands laugh among themselves on Saturday nights when they thought Alfred was out of earshot. No woman gave orders to his men. She could ask. She could request. She could bat her lashes until the wind changed. But no woman issued commands on the Granger spread, because the Granger spread ran the way Alfred ran it: clean, straight, efficient, no sentiment. 3 rules, no exceptions. He had kept them for 4 years without a single incident. That was before the morning of June the 14th, 1883, when the stage from Amarillo rolled through the gate of his ranch at 7 o'clock in the morning and deposited one Celia Mercer onto his property like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples did not stop for the rest of his life. Alfred was at the fence line when the stage arrived, watching one of his wranglers, a lean young man named Pete Hollies, work a reluctant bay gelding through its paces in the near paddock. He heard the wheels on the hard-packed road before he saw the coach, and he turned with the patient unhurry of a man who had long ago made peace with the fact that trouble always found its own way to his door. The stage was dusty and road-worn, the kind of vehicle that had seen too many miles and not enough maintenance, and it rocked to a stop just inside the gate before the driver climbed down and opened the door with the tired gallantry of a man doing a job and not much else. What came out of that stage was not what Alfred expected. She was tall, nearly as tall as Pete, who was not a short man with dark auburn hair pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat that had clearly seen better days, the brim tilted at an angle that managed to look both practical and defiant at once. Her traveling dress was a deep blue-gray, not fine by any measure, the kind of dress a woman chose for durability rather than impression. She carried a leather satchel in one hand and a rolled document in the other, and she was looking at Alfred's ranch house with an expression of concentrated assessment that he recognized because he had worn it himself 100 times looking over someone else's cattle. She was cataloging the place, taking inventory. Alfred walked toward the stage with unhurried steps, thumbs hooked in his belt, and when he was close enough to speak without raising his voice, he said, "This is private property." The woman turned and looked at him, and he got his first full look at her face. She was perhaps 26, maybe 27, with sharp dark eyes that caught the early morning sun and threw it back like polished flint. There was a smudge of road dust on one cheekbone, and she did not seem to notice it or to care. Her jaw was set with the particular firmness of a woman who had been argued with too many times and had stopped being polite about it. "Mr. Alfred Granger," she said. Her voice was clear and direct, with a trace of somewhere more eastern, not a city voice exactly, but not plains-born either. "That is me," Alfred said. She thrust the rolled document toward him. "Then this is for you. I am Celia Mercer. Your brother hired me." Alfred stared at her for a long moment without moving. Then he took the document, unrolled it, and read it with the thorough deliberateness of a man who did not skim things. When he was done, he read it a second time. Then he rolled it back up and held it at his side and looked at Celia Mercer with an expression that gave away approximately nothing. "My brother," he said at last, "is dead." Something shifted in Celia's face. Not shock exactly, more like a recalibration, the way a navigator looks when the landmark they were steering by turns out to have moved. "I know that," she said quietly. "He died 2 weeks after he signed this, but the contract is binding, Mr. Granger. He hired me to assess and reorganize the financial management of this operation, and his signature is on that paper along with the seal of Mercer and Associates, and I have come a very long way to do the work." Alfred looked at the document again. His brother Daniel's handwriting was there, no mistaking it, the looping D, the backward slant of the capital G in Granger. Daniel had always done everything Alfred could not stand. Hired people without asking, made decisions that were not his to make, left complications behind him like a trail of dropped tools. Even dead, apparently, he was still doing it. How far? Alfred asked, not because it mattered, but because he was not ready to say the things that needed saying quite yet. 3 days by train from Kansas City, then 1 day by stage, Celia said. "Which is relevant, Mr. Granger, because it means I have already invested considerable time and expense into a contract your brother believed in strongly enough to pay a month's retainer for, and I would very much like to begin." Alfred breathed through his nose. The sun was moving up the sky, and the horses needed checking, and Pete was still standing by the paddock fence, pretending to be occupied with his own business while watching everything with the transparent interest of a man who had nothing more pressing to do. "I will show you to the guest room," Alfred said finally. "We will discuss this at breakfast." Celia Mercer looked at him with those steady dark eyes and said, "I would actually like to see the stable first. Your brother's letter mentioned some discrepancy in the horse sale records from last autumn, and I prefer to start with the physical inventory before I open the books." Alfred stopped walking. He turned back to her slowly. "Rule 1. She had just asked to break Rule 1, not even knowing it was a rule in the first 90 seconds of her being on his property, with the same calm, matter-of-fact tone she might use to ask for a glass of water. He was about to say no. He opened his mouth to say no. The word was right there, solid and familiar, the same no he had used a dozen times before. But Celia Mercer had already looked away from him and was speaking to the stage driver about her trunk, handing him a coin from the small purse at her wrist with a murmured thank you that somehow managed to be both efficient and genuinely warm. The driver tipped his hat to her with a degree of respect that Alfred noticed the man did not bother extending to Alfred himself. The rolled document in Alfred's hand had his dead brother's name on it. "The stable is this way," Alfred said, and he heard the words come out of his own mouth with a kind of astonishment that he hoped did not show on his face. It did not show. He had spent too many years learning to keep his face still. He led her across the yard, past the cookhouse where his cook, an older man named Ezra who had been with Alfred since the early days, was visible through the open window watching the proceedings with undisguised curiosity. Celia walked beside Alfred with the confident stride of a woman who was not performing composure but simply had it, and she looked around the yard with those assessing eyes, and Alfred found himself looking at his own property the way a stranger would, which was unsettling. The stable was large and clean, 12 stalls with good ventilation, tack room at the far end, the smell of hay and leather and horse, and the particular clean, dusty warmth that Alfred associated with everything right in the world. 3 of his best horses were in their stalls, the big roan stallion Cassius, the dun mare he called Patience, and a young gray who had not yet been named because Alfred had not yet decided what he was. Celia walked straight to Cassius's stall and looked at him with serious attention. Cassius, who was suspicious of everyone including most of Alfred's own hands, stretched his neck over the stall door and blew softly through his nostrils at her in what was, by Cassius's standards, a near declaration of friendship. Alfred stared. Celia put her free hand up and let Cassius smell it, then stroked his nose once twice, with the unhurried ease of a person who had been around horses her whole life. "He is a magnificent animal," she said, not to Alfred particularly, but in the general direction of the stable air, the way people spoke when they meant something and did not need acknowledgement for it. "He does not usually take to strangers," Alfred said. "Most horses are better judges of character than most people," Celia said, and moved along the stall row, counting, noting, her lips moving faintly as she did some internal accounting. Then she stopped and turned to him. "Your brother's letter mentioned that a consignment of 6 horses was sold last October to a buyer named Whitmore out of San Antonio. The sale was recorded at $210 for the lot. Is that accurate?" Alfred crossed his arms. "What does that have to do with the Financial Review?" "Because 6 horses of this quality, Mr. Granger, and I can tell the quality even from what I see here, would fetch considerably more than $210 in any honest sale. Your brother suspected the figure was wrong. I would like to see the original receipt." Alfred looked at her for a long moment in the amber morning light of the stable, the horses shifting quietly around them, Cassius still watching Celia with an expression of equine approval that Alfred found frankly irritating. His foreman, a heavy-set man named Doyle Crenshaw who had been with the ranch for 2 years, had handled the Whitmore sale. Alfred had not personally overseen it. He had trusted Doyle's accounting because Doyle had always given him clean numbers, and Alfred was a man who extended trust until he had reason to withdraw it. Suddenly he was less certain about that trust than he had been 10 minutes ago. "The books are in my office," he said. "Rule 2. He watched himself say it. He watched himself walk toward the stable door with Celia Mercer following, her leather satchel over her shoulder and her hat still tilted at that angle. And he was aware in the very back of his mind that he was about to do the thing he never did, which was allow a woman into the books, and he could not quite locate the part of himself that was supposed to stop it from happening. His office was in the main house, a small room off the front hall that smelled of pine resin and ink, with a wide pine desk and shelves holding 3 years of ledgers bound in brown leather. The window looked out over the front yard, and the early sun came through it in a long, clean stripe across the floorboards. Celia set her satchel on the chair across from the desk. Alfred's chair was behind it. The other chair was for visitors, and opened it with efficient movements, producing a notebook, 2 pencils, and a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles that she settled onto her nose with the practical gesture of a woman who needed them, and had long ago stopped caring whether they made her look severe. They did not make her look severe. They made her look like someone who was about to discover the truth. Alfred brought the October ledger down from the shelf and set it on the desk, and opened it to the relevant page. Celia leaned over it, one finger tracing the columns, and Alfred stood to the side and watched her work and told himself it was nothing, it was merely business. It was a contract his dead brother had signed, and it would be sorted out in a day or 2 and she would leave. "There," she said, after perhaps 4 minutes. She tapped a column with one finger. "The receipt total is recorded at 210, but look at the notation beside it. Your brother put a small mark here, do you see it? This kind of mark he used elsewhere in these records to indicate a discrepancy he had noted but not yet investigated." Alfred leaned over the desk beside her, close enough to catch the scent of her something clean, faint, like cedar soap and road dust. He looked at the mark. It was small, a tiny bent line in the margin, and it was there. He had never noticed it. "Daniel was in Kansas City when the sale happened," Alfred said slowly. "He was staying with Aunt Ruth. He would have been working from copies of the records. So he had access to copies, and he noticed the discrepancy, and he hired me before he could investigate it himself," Celia said. She straightened and looked at Alfred with a directness that he found both unsettling and, in some reluctant corner of himself that he chose not to examine at present, refreshing. "Mr. Granger, I think it is very possible that you have been shorted a significant sum by whoever handled this sale." "Doyle Crenshaw handled the sale," Alfred said. "Then I would suggest that you and I go through the full ledger for the past year before you speak to him. Celia said. So that you have every figure confirmed and in order. You do not want to make an accusation without evidence. Alfred looked at her. She was right. He knew she was right. The deliberate, orderly part of him that had built this ranch from nothing recognized good advice when it walked in the door. I will send Ezra for coffee, he said. Celia almost smiled. It was a small movement at the corner of her mouth, barely there. That would be appreciated, she said, and settled into the visitor's chair and opened her notebook. And Alfred Granger stood in the doorway of his own office and realized with the slow, heavy certainty of a man who has just looked at the horizon and seen weather coming that his rules had already lasted approximately as long as the morning dew. The work took the better part of 3 hours. Celia moved through the ledgers with a systematic precision that Alfred found himself watching with something close to admiration, though he kept that observation strictly behind the wall of his face. She did not rush. She did not skip. She cross-referenced numbers against their source entries with patient exactness, and when she found something that did not balance, she did not announce it with drama, but simply noted it in her book with a small, precise notation, and moved on to the next column. By 10 o'clock she had found 3 separate discrepancies in Doyle Crenshaw's accounting, totaling. When Celia added the figures and showed Alfred $147 over 8 months. Not a fortune, not a ruinous sum, but on a working ranch running on the margins that all working ranches ran on, $147 was months of supplies, a new saddle, the difference between breaking even and coming up short in a hard winter. Alfred sat back in his chair and looked at the figures and felt a very old, very familiar anger move through him. Not hot anger, but the cold, deliberate kind, the kind that had an edge like a well-kept knife. I want to be certain, he said. I am certain, Celia said, but I understand why you would want to verify it yourself before proceeding. Take the evening to look it over. I have made notes on each entry. She pushed the notebook across the desk toward him. Everything is marked and cross-referenced. Alfred looked at the notebook. Her handwriting was spare and exact, nothing decorative about it, every number clear and every notation terse. It was the handwriting of a person who wrote for function and not for show. He did not say thank you. He was not sure why. He said, "Where did you learn this?" Celia took off her spectacles and looked at him directly. "My father was an accountant in St. Joseph, Missouri. He taught me the work from the time I was old enough to hold a pencil. When he died, I took over his practice because my mother needed the income and I was the only one who knew how. I did it for 6 years. Then I saw an advertisement from a firm in Kansas City looking for someone with experience in financial assessment for agricultural operations specifically, and I applied." She paused. "I was the only woman who applied. They hired me because I was better than the other applicants. I know that is not what men usually say about a woman they have hired, but it is what happened." Alfred regarded her. There was no particular defiance in the way she said it. Just the same flat accuracy she brought to the columns of numbers. "And my brother found you through this firm," he said. "He came to the Kansas City office with a concern about his stake in this ranch," Celia said. "He wanted an independent assessment before he decided whether to invest further or sell his share. He said," she paused here briefly, and something in her eyes moved. "He said he trusted his brother to run the ranch well but not to catch someone stealing from him, because honest men are often the last to suspect dishonesty in others." Alfred was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That sounds like Daniel." "He was a kind man," Celia said. "He spoke highly of you." Alfred stood up. The morning sun was coming through the window at a full angle now, and it was past the time he should have been out checking on the eastern fence line, which had been giving trouble all week. His day was already unraveling in the way days did when unexpected things arrived in the gate at 7 in the morning. "There is a room at the top of the stairs," he said. "Second door. Ezra will bring your trunk up. Supper is at 6. Celia nodded. She was already putting her spectacles back on and returning to the ledger. "I would like to finish the November accounts before I stop," she said, not as a question. Alfred was at the door. He turned back and looked at her, this woman he had known for 3 hours, sitting at his desk with his dead brother's ledgers open in front of her, wearing the spectacles that made her look like the most focused person he had been in a room with in several years. "Miss Mercer," he said. She looked up. "Thank you," he said, "for what you have found so far." She looked at him for a moment with those sharp, steady eyes. Then she said, "You are welcome, Mr. Granger." He went out into the yard, and the sun hit him full in the face, and somewhere behind him he heard Ezra humming in the cookhouse, and the horses in the paddock calling to each other, and the whole morning feeling somehow different than it had been before the stage arrived, as though the air had been reset to a new frequency that his instruments were still calibrating. He did not notice, until he was halfway across the yard, that he was thinking about her eyes. He stopped walking for approximately 2 seconds, identified the direction of his thoughts with the grim recognition of a man who knows a dangerous trail when he sets foot on it, and deliberately redirected his attention to the fence line. The fence line was a great deal safer. Doyle Crenshaw was out at the western pasture that morning, overseeing the movement of 60 head of cattle to the better grass. Alfred rode out to him on Patience, taking the long way around so he could check the eastern fence as he went and make the ride useful. The fence was holding mostly, though 2 posts near the creek bed needed resetting before the next hard rain. He found Doyle near the gate of the western pasture, a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, with a full mustache and the permanently squinted expression of a man who spent too much time looking into the sun. Doyle had been a capable foreman by every measure Alfred had used to measure such things, which did not include, apparently, checking whether the man was honest with the accounting. Alfred did not confront him. Not yet. He needed to be certain, the way he had told Celia he did. He watched Doyle work and said nothing about the ledgers, and rode back to the ranch in the late morning with the certainty sitting in his chest like a cold stone that he was going to have a very hard conversation before the week was out. At noon, Alfred passed the paddock fence on his way to the cookhouse and stopped cold. Celia was standing inside the paddock, not just inside the paddock. She was standing in the middle of it with the young gray horse, the unnamed one, at her shoulder, and the gray was following her with a loose, willing attention that it had never once offered Alfred, and Celia was walking in slow, easy circles, while Pete Holly stood at the fence with his hat in his hands, and watched with the reverent expression of a man witnessing something he does not fully understand but recognizes as good. And Pete Holly's was following Celia's instructions. She had said something. Alfred caught the tail end of it as he came closer. "Move him to the right fence line, just bring him easy, do not crowd his shoulder," and Pete had nodded and moved to do it, and the gray had stepped over with the soft, willing movement of a horse that felt safe. Rule 1. Rule 3. Both of them simultaneously before noon. Alfred stood at the fence and looked at this for a moment. Celia had not yet noticed him. She was focused entirely on the horse, her hat pushed back now so the sun fell full on her face, one hand at the gray's neck in a light, steadying touch. She said something low to the horse that Alfred could not hear, and the gray lowered his head and stood easy. Pete looked up and saw Alfred, and had the good sense to look slightly embarrassed, though not embarrassed enough to take a step back from where he was standing. Alfred opened the paddock gate and came in, and Celia turned and looked at him with the same absence of guilt that she seemed to bring to everything. She did not apologize. She did not explain herself immediately. She waited for him to speak first, which, he was beginning to understand, was a thing she did. She waited and watched, the way a good surveyor waited to take the measure of the ground before marking it. "This is the stable area," Alfred said. "You need my permission." "I know," Celia said. "I asked Ezra and Ezra said it was all right." Alfred turned and looked toward the cookhouse. Through the window he could see Ezra's shoulders shaking with what was almost certainly laughter. "Ezra," Alfred said, not loudly, "does not have authority over the stable area." "I realize that now," Celia said, and she did look briefly apologetic, a quick, genuine compression of expression that was over in a moment. I will ask you directly next time. But Mr. Granger, since I am already here, this horse has not been working correctly. Look at how he holds his left foreleg. He is compensating for something. It is not severe yet, but if it is not addressed it will worsen. Alfred looked at the gray's left foreleg. He looked at it the way a man looked at something he had been looking past for a week without seeing. The horse was standing with a very faint but distinct easing of weight on that leg. Not a limp, not yet. A beginning. He went to the horse's side and ran his hand down the foreleg, found the heat at the tendon low, barely there but present. Early stage tendon strain. If he had caught it in another 2 weeks, it would have been considerably worse. He straightened and stood very close to the gray's shoulder and was aware that Celia was on the other side of the horse's neck, close enough that the horse's breath moved between them. "You have an eye for horses," he said. "My father kept 2, she said, "and I have worked with enough ranching operations to read the signs." Alfred stepped back from the horse and looked at Pete. "Get Jim to poultice that foreleg this afternoon," he said. "Light exercise only for 2 weeks." Pete nodded and went to do it, taking the gray by the lead with the ease of a man who knew horses, and Alfred and Celia were left standing in the middle of the paddock with the midday sun overhead and the high blue Texas sky pressing down on everything. "About the 3rd rule," Alfred said. Celia looked at him steadily. "You have rules about women specifically," she said, not accusatory, just noting it. "I have rules about the management of this ranch," Alfred said. "And those rules include women not giving direction to your hands," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "It has been necessary," he said. "There have been situations." "I am sure there have been," Celia said. "And I am not here to run your ranch, Mr. Granger. I am here to audit your books. But when I see something that affects the value of the assets I am auditing, I am going to mention it. That is the job." He looked at her. She looked back at him. The sun was very bright. "The horse's left foreleg," he said, "affects the value of the asset," she said. The most infuriating part, Alfred thought, was that she was entirely right, and he knew she was entirely right, and she knew he knew it. "I will revise the rule," he said, and heard his own words with something like disorientation, the way you heard a familiar song played in an unfamiliar key. Celia almost smiled again. "A little more of it this time. Come to dinner," he said. "Ezra does a reasonable noon meal." They walked across the yard together, and Alfred was aware of every step, aware of the shape of her stride beside his, aware in the way you became aware of a new sound you had never heard before and then could not stop noticing. Over the noon meal, salt pork and pan bread and good strong coffee, Alfred told Celia about Daniel. Not because she asked, but because the subject of his brother seemed to have settled between them like a shared obligation, a thing that needed to be spoken aloud. "He was 4 years younger than me," Alfred said. "He had no interest in the land. He liked books, liked numbers. That was how he knew to go to your firm, I suppose. He had a stake in this property from our father's will, and he never interfered mostly. He visited twice a year and drank Ezra's coffee and argued with me about cattle prices and went back to Kansas City. He told me he was proud of what you had built," Celia said. She was eating with the easy directness she brought to everything, not performing delicacy about it, just eating because she was hungry, which somehow made the meal feel more honest. "He also apparently thought I could not catch a man stealing from me," Alfred said. "He thought you trusted too much," Celia said. "There is a difference." Alfred looked at her. "Trusting people is not a flaw," she said. "It is what allows you to build something like this." She gestured with her coffee cup toward the window, toward the yard and the horses and the whole of the Granger spread in the full noon light. "A man who trusted no one could not keep a single hand on his payroll long enough to build a ranch this size. The flaw is not the trust. It is the absence of verification." "You sound like my brother now," Alfred said. "I imagine that is partly why he hired my firm," she said. They ate the rest of the meal in a silence that was, Alfred noticed, entirely comfortable. Not the strained silence of 2 strangers who had run out of small talk, but the easy quiet of 2 people who did not need to fill all the air between them. He noticed this. He cataloged it. He filed it somewhere in the back of his mind, where he kept the things he was not yet ready to examine, and went back to his work. The next 3 days had a rhythm to them that Alfred would remember for the rest of his life, with the precise, indelible clarity of things that changed everything. The days themselves looked ordinary from the outside. Celia, in the office with the ledgers and her spectacles and her neat-noted books, Alfred in the yard and the pastures and the stable doing the work of the ranch, meals with Ezra's cooking, and the long yellow evenings on the porch when the heat was just beginning to ease. But underneath the ordinary surface something was moving, the way water moved under winter ice, felt rather than seen. Alfred found himself timing his returns to the house around the hours when Celia worked. He told himself this was practical, that he needed to be available if she had questions about the records. This was not untrue. She did have questions, specific and well-framed questions that cut straight to the essential matter, and he answered them with the same directness, and then stood in the doorway of his own office watching her work and thinking about things he had no particular business thinking about. On the second evening she came out onto the porch just as the sun was going down and found him there with his coffee, watching the sky go orange over the distant caprock, and she sat in the other chair without ceremony and said, "It is bigger than I expected." He thought for a moment she meant the discrepancy in the books, but she was looking at the sky, and he realized she meant the land, the openness of it, the way the Texas plains ran out in every direction under the enormous bowl of the evening sky. "It takes some getting used to," he said. "When I first came out here I could not sleep for a week, too quiet, too wide." "Where did you come from?" "Ohio," he said. "Came west when I was 19 with a man named Cowboy who had schemes. The schemes failed. I stayed." She smiled at that. A real one this time, not just the corner of her mouth but the full thing, and it changed her face the way lamplight changes a room, not adding anything that was not already there, just illuminating it. "What made you stay when the schemes failed?" she asked. "The land," he said simply. "I put my hands in it once, first spring, helping a homesteader with a field, and I thought, this is real. This does not lie to you. You put work into it and the work shows. There is no," he stopped and looked at the sky, "there is no pretending with land. It is what it is." Celia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father was like that about numbers. He said figures never lied to you if you read them honestly. The lie is always in the person recording them, never in the number itself." "Your father sounds like a man I would have liked," Alfred said. She looked at him with something quiet and genuine in her face. "He was," she said. "He would have liked you, I think." They sat in the evening air that smelled of dust and prairie grass, and the far-off rain that never quite arrived in June. And Alfred felt the wall he had spent years building between himself and every complication that wore a warm human face begin to develop, in its most carefully mortared section, something that felt uncomfortably like a crack. On the third morning Celia found the final piece. Alfred was at the desk with her when she set the pencil down and turned her notebook toward him and said, in a voice that was professional and precise and entirely steady, $209 over 14 months in total, 3 separate instances, all in transactions handled by Crenshaw, all underrecorded against receipts that he would have held himself as foreman. Your brother's mark is on every one of them." Alfred looked at the figures. The cold knife-edge anger was back, but cleaner now, less personal. It was the anger of a man who had the facts and knew what to do with them. "Is this sufficient for legal action?" he said. "Records are clear and the discrepancies are documented," Celia said. "Whether the circuit judge would take it to prosecution depends on whether you have the physical receipts. Do you?" "Doyle handles the receipts," Alfred said. "Then you may want to move quickly," she said, "before he realizes an audit has been done." Alfred was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why quickly?" "Because a man who has been stealing from you for 14 months will have planned for the possibility of discovery," Celia said. "Not planned for it specifically, but any man who steals with that level of patience has also thought about what he would do if he were caught." She met Alfred's eyes. He may already know I am here and why. Alfred set the notebook down. He thought about Doyle Crenshaw's face, the squinted expression and the flat steadiness of it, the way Doyle had been slightly less available than usual these last 3 days, slightly more occupied with tasks at the edges of the property. He thought about small things he had not thought to notice. "I will deal with it today," he said. "Do you want me present?" Celia asked. He looked at her. The question surprised him, not the offer but the straightforwardness of it, the simple willingness to be there if it helped. "No," he said, "but thank you." She nodded and picked up her pencil. He dealt with it that afternoon. He rode to where Doyle was working at the far northwest corner of the property, and he confronted him there, quietly on horseback, with the figures in his head and the cold anger doing what cold anger did best, keeping everything precise. He gave Doyle the numbers and watched Doyle's face go through several stages of calculation before settling, with the resigned defeat of a man who has been planning an escape route for 14 months and just found it blocked, into a kind of bleak honesty. Doyle did not deny it. He argued it was less than what it looked like, that some of it was error, that Alfred had misread the records. Alfred replied with the specific entries and the specific receipts,